final presentation of the day is Laura Voicu, who, they had gone to that. So Laura's going to talk about the business ROI, the value, the return on investment of cybersecurity, and how to use FAIR in that process. So I'm going to turn it over to her, but I will say this. So Laura and I talked, and like I often do, I'm like, hey, I want to write a paper on that. So I've already recruited her. We're going to go further into this topic, but Laura, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.
Yep.
So there is definite disadvantages, but also advantages to being the last speaker of the day. So I hope your energy levels are still enough to bear with me for this presentation. The advantage is that a lot of the things that I'm going to touch upon have already been discussed today. So repetition is always a good thing. It brings the point across. So the ROI of cyber risk decisions. Traditionally, this is calculated using the ROSI formula, right? And that has its limitations. And what I would like to talk to you about today is how can we bring a more financial discipline to making cyber risk decisions in the same way that we're bringing a statistical rigor and discipline through the use of the FAIR model. So as an alternative to ROSI, I'd like to introduce a couple of tools that we can use in combination to calculate the ROI of cyber risk. That is, of course, the FAIR model, obviously, but also financial metrics like the net present value and internal rate of return in combination with the Gordon-Loeb model, which you can use to optimize for efficiency. And so I'll walk you through a ransomware scenario that will sort of help bring the points across and touch through all these topics. So I made a slightly provocative statement on purpose that ROSI as a way to calculate ROI is failing us and it has limitations. And I'd like to slightly adjust that, amend that statement. It does have its benefits, right? It's a very simple, familiar metric that we can use. And so if that is being tracked, right, that's great. There's no need to explain something new. It's very easy to use for fast go, no-go screening decision, small projects, small time frame investments. But it does fail us when we need to quantify long-term investments. ROSI as a formula on its own does not have a time component. And unfortunately, our risk reduction investments, our control improvements are not always quick wins. They're long-running projects, and there is an inherent uncertainty in that is not reflected in the ROI. Our risk landscape is changing rapidly. It's shifting. Our attack surface is growing. Our business is growing, and so the risk exposure is not a constant year over year in time. It changes and moves with our business. And perhaps last but not least, there is a slight misalignment in goals, right? When we use ROSI as a metric, the tendency is to maximize the metric. We maximize the ROI of our investments. But in practice, boards and CFOs, they want to optimize the spending. They do not need to maximize the ROI. And so that is a slight conflict of interests there. So, if not ROSI, then what? And I would like to propose a small thought exercise. I realize it's late in the day for this, but what if we could reframe the question from what is the ROI of my investment into what is the optimal amount to spend to reduce my risk? Or is this the optimal amount to spend to reduce my risk? And so we'll see on using these models and frameworks and tools on how we could do that in this next example. I'm not going to go into the details of the FAIR model itself, right? It's late in the day, but I will walk you through the FAIR part of this example more from a process or workflow perspective. And at a very high level, that involves 3 steps. In the first part, we identify our problem space, the decision to be made, the area of concern. What is the scope of the assessment that we're doing. The outcome being a well-formulated risk scenario, which is extremely important, and we've heard about this in a lot of the presentations before. We analyze that and look at the attack surface, attack chain modeling, controls that matter, how to measure them, with the end result of plugging those numbers into the FAIR model, calculating loss event frequency, loss model, and the ALE at the end. We do a what-if analysis to quantify control improvements and prioritize those. Right. And make decisions based on that. So let's run through a ransomware scenario through this whole pipeline. And this is a fictitious example. Right? It's a lot of detail on that. That's on purpose, no need to read that. I think the level of detail depends on the scope and the decision that you're trying to make. But the most important part is that you have a well-formulated scenario that looks at your threat, asset, method, and effect. Right? And in our case, right, we're a financial institution. I come from Switzerland. Let's look at a Swiss bank. And the threat actors are a financially motivated cyber criminal groups, looking at our data and processes that are the asset of risk in our bank, internal confidential financial data of the bank, customers' data as well, and any other business processes that are revenue generating, right, or otherwise essential to the bank. We look at the method, right, in our case, and the initial attack method is quite important. We'll assume here, for the sake of this example, a spear phishing as one of the most common attack vectors for ransomware, and the final goal is a ransomware with data exfiltration. The effects of such a scenario for our bank are really big, quite catastrophic actually. Business interruption, direct financial losses, ransomware payment, if any, regulatory and legal penalties, reputation damage, missed opportunity costs, and so on. Like I said, the level of detail that you put into defining the risk scenario depends on the scope and the decision that you want to make. And so if you're a more visual person, like myself, I think the FAIR taxonomy is a great way to map the most important components in your risk scenario, right? So for our ransomware, we're looking at cyber criminals with malicious intent, looking at all of our data and business processes. The method is ransomware with data exfiltration, and the initial attack method, obviously spear phishing. We can map all the effects and different kinds of losses that we're expecting from this scenario over there. Pretty much the exact same thing in a more visual way and perhaps easier to understand. The next part looks at analysis and evaluation of this. And then this is the FAIR quantification. And here, for the sake of time and simplicity, I'm looking at a very, very simplified version of the attack chain. We have seen it earlier on in different presentations on how to do that. And this is a very, very important point because this lets us understand and map our controls to these individual steps in the attack chain. Right? You can use FairCam for this. I strongly recommend that. Again, for the sake of simplicity, let's assume we're looking at email filtering as our most relevant loss event control, and for the initial attack surface. And we gather all data, telemetry. We calibrate our subject matter experts and gather their estimations. And so before looking into what could we do to mitigate this risk, we're looking at perhaps a threat event frequency of 10 attempts per year, right? Our susceptibility at 30%. Again, this is illustrative data, not a real thing. But this leads us to a loss event frequency of 3 events per year and a loss magnitude of around 2 million per event. So, okay, we're not that big of a Swiss bank, right? That's not a huge number there. What-if analysis will show us that once we implement that email filtering solution, well, our threat event frequency will remain the same, Attackers will attack independently of what we have. Our loss magnitude will not change either, right? We'll still stay the same. But what will change and what will be reduced is our susceptibility to attack. And we can see the actual net difference between the before and after fair risk assessment, right? That is a net difference in our case of $4 million. And this is sort of the benefit side of the equation when we look at the ROI of risk. So, what does it mean when we plug that into a traditional ROSI formula, right? If you're looking at a 3-year time horizon, undiscounted, we're looking at a total benefit of 12 million. We can talk to our IT operations department, understand what is the cost of investment. What would it take for us to purchase and maintain and implement that email filtering solution over 3 years? For the sake of simplicity here, let's say 1 million. That is split between initial investment and yearly maintenance costs. And we're looking at a ROSI calculation that is fantastical, right? That is so great, right? 1,100%. Even if we annualize that, right, on a yearly basis, we're still looking at a really, really good number. And if that sounds too good to be true, then maybe perhaps it is, right? We don't know what will happen in 3-year times. And so we don't really know if this will actually come to happen. Right? So if not ROSI, then what? And what can we do to make it better and more realistic and more in a language that our finance stakeholders will understand better? So net present value is one way to look at money spent today to see if the future benefit, in our case in 3 years' time, is still worth it once time and uncertainty are taken into account. And so when we project that over a 3-year time period, we can reflect, right, better reflect risk and time. And how do we do that? That is taken into account by a so-called discount rate. Right? Discount rate accounts for the fact that money available today is worth more than the same amount in the future, right? Due to its potential to earn interest or because of uncertainties. And so when you simulate that on a 3-year basis, right, already in the first year we have a positive net present value. So that's a good decision to go, a good reason to go ahead with this. But we can also see there that every year, the benefits are becoming less and less over time. So this is because there's a sort of a law of diminishing effect that comes into play there, right? We cannot confidently state that the same benefits that we're seeing this year will be the same that we'll see next year as well. So, on that simulation, right, I'm using a discount rate of 15%, right? So, where do these numbers come from? The initial investment is something that your IT, ops, procurement team can help you try to figure out and iron out. The net benefit is what comes out of our FAIR analysis, right, of the what-if analysis. That is the actual net benefit that we're calculating using FAIR. And the discount rate is something that your finance team actually owns. And so it is extremely important to collaborate early with partners in the organization, right? Finance, IT, procurement, so that we can align on financial models, realistic numbers that we can plug into our calculations to make sure that our numbers are credible and that our stakeholders are on board with that decision. And alignment early on in the calculation is extremely important, right? Because selecting an appropriate discount rate is depending on many factors, right? For cybersecurity investments, discount rates can range from 10 to maybe 30, 35%. And that depends on many factors, right? The organization's weighted average cost of capital, investment time horizon, right? If we're looking at a 3-year time versus a 5-year time horizon, that's a completely different story. What will happen in 5 years' time? But also scenario-specific factors, right? Higher discount rates would probably be applied to scenarios with greater uncertainty in risk reduction, right? Remember, when you talk about estimates and you give your confidence level into those estimates, those can directly translate into smaller or higher discount rates. And so in a simulation over there, I have looked at discount rates from 0 to 50% for our example over there. And at 10%, we're looking at a net present value of around 9 million. If we move to a discount rate of 30 or 35%, that net present value is almost reduced to half. So what was initially perhaps a static, high, rosy percentage on your cybersecurity investment might turn out that is not a good investment when your MVP is dropping to half or dropping below break-even point because you have to apply higher discount rates because of a higher uncertainty in your estimates and in your investment or a larger time horizon. Now, your finance team will probably be the best person to talk to about, right? There's different ways of using financial models. Different companies use different rates and different metrics. Two other metrics that I have seen as more commonly used are the internal rate of return, which is sort of the break-even point, annual return, that sets your MVP to 0. So mathematically, that is taking the MVP formula and setting that to 0 and calculating the rate of return where your MVP is 0. And in our case here, we have an IRR of 135%. That is great. If that is above the hurdle rate of your company, then that is a good, solid investment. Strong value, solid risk protection over time. Right? So you can safely go ahead with that. The IRR is actually a finance favorite of ranking products, of ranking investments, by their payback speed. Right? How fast are you producing a return on investment for that cybersecurity spending? The Gordon-Loeb model is more of a theoretical framework, right? So it's a model for optimizing cybersecurity investments that sets a cap on spending at roughly a third or no more than 37% of the expected loss on a control. And beyond that, we're not getting the same, right, risk reduction value. That sounds counterintuitive, right? Because ideally, we want to spend more to get more security, to be better. But again, there is a law of diminishing return that comes into play there as well, right? The first dollar that you invest in improving and control is bringing a much better return on investment than the next and the next and the next. So, if you're not a morning person, I'm not, and I need a lot of coffees in the morning, right? My first coffee is what really wakes me up. And by the time I'm reaching my 5th coffee, it's still good, and I'm still enjoying it, but I'm not getting the same impact from my coffee. And so, and this is a model, so use it as a guide, not as a gospel, right? The authors themselves actually advise that it is a model and should not be used as an alternative to good business judgment. Right? No, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, it is. And so, it is. So, putting it all together, right? We can use FAIR to quantify the risk, or ILD reduction. We can use financial metrics, net present value, internal rate of return, to weigh costs against future gains and decide whether this is a good investment, whether it will pay off within 3-year time, 5-year time. Right. And the Gordon-Loeb model, again, assures we don't overspend, right? Our purpose, or from a finance perspective, from an economics perspective, the purpose is to optimize our spending, right? Not to maximize it. And so this gives us a good way of confidently answering the question of whether should we invest or is this the optimal investment, right? Using a data-driven approach to security. There's always limitations, right, to using models and frameworks. Right? Assumptions matter, right? We put assumptions into models. We put assumptions into our fair risk quantification to begin with, but also all the other models that we have seen here. And so the results are only as good as our input data. Right? Principle of garbage in, garbage out applies here as well. The threat landscape is changing rapidly, now more than ever. Right? And so whatever assumptions we make today may not hold in 2 years' time or in 3 years' time. Right? Models are a simplification of reality. Right? All models are wrong, but some models are useful. Keep that in mind, that long-tail events may sometimes fall outside of statistical models, and so all that may not necessarily apply directly. They are useful, but not infallible, right? And so, for example, on the concrete case of the garden law model, this actually assumes specific mathematical conditions and circumstances to hold for the model to be applicable. Final thoughts, because it's very late, and I thank you all for bearing with me until the end of the presentation. I think cybersecurity budgeting, right, is a calculated bet. It is not a quest for zero risk. So when we can apply more financial rigor to doing that, we can make smarter bets and smarter investments. These tools can provide us with a solid foundation for better decision-making, while at the same time acknowledging that there are uncertainties in every single decision that we make in cyber risk. So the goal is not to eliminate all risk, counterintuitively, or against maybe our better wishes, but to find a sweet spot where additional security spending no longer justifies the incremental risk reduction. And last but not least, because it bears repeating, again, partner early with different stakeholders in your organization: finance, IT, operations, procurement. They can help you validate models, financial models, metrics, rates, cost assumptions, and ensure that these numbers are aligned across the board.
Yeah. Laura, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think for the sake of time, we'll forego questions, but I just want to say, like, if you all remember the feedback from the State of Cyber Risk Management Survey, that cost management, financial management was the #1 requirement in that list. So I think this is really important, and I think you gave a lot of really great advice with that. The partnership especially, in doing that. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Yes, I look forward to collaborating more.
Looking forward to the paper, yes.
Excellent, excellent. All right.